Welcome to Beyond the Microphone, a podcast about podcasters and the stories of how their shows came together, grew, and what they discovered along the way. I'm your host, Adam Baruh. Before we get into our interview today, I want to talk a little bit more about AI, something I've spoken previously about on this show, but something really interesting came up yesterday, and I think it really kind of speaks to where we're at right now overall with AI. I mean, we're all fascinated by ChatGPT, and in fact, many of us are using it in our jobs. In one way or another, it really is a useful tool. And so I get an email from a friend yesterday, and he's like, check this out. And so he sent me, basically, it was a video of a lady just kind of reading for like 5 minutes. She's just kind of talking on some subject. And then they basically used AI to take her voice and train an AI model, which then they whoever put this together, they typed out a script, and their AI tool basically read. It used like an overdub feature or voice generation feature to basically read the script that they wrote with that lady from the video's voice trained in the AI model. And you could tell a little bit that it didn't seem like the way she was using or saying some words, that it wasn't like normal, like colloquial English. I can't remember the example of that, but you could tell a little bit. Like, you wouldn't be able to tell it's AI, but you could tell, maybe English isn't like a first language for her or whatever. I mean, she didn't have an accent, but just the way she kind of read off some words was very much like a computer would. But I was really surprised by the inflection, the pauses, the kind of like, saying something and then kind of like waiting for emotional impact. So it's a little, like, to be honest, it was a little frightening for me to hear that. I mean, there's a lot to be figured out with AI. There's a lot as a society that we need to figure out. One of the classic examples right now is like the education system and students being able to like a lot more easily plagiarize stuff than when I was in school. So it's not fair. No, it's a real big concern, and that's only one of the many concerns. I mean, so when it comes to like being able to deep fake a dialogue, a monologue, if you will, by just typing in a script and having AI read it off to you as somebody else's voice, I'm definitely very concerned about the deep fake, the ability to deep fake people saying things that they never said or whatever. So obviously that's something that needs to get figured out. And I also, in terms of like my friend who sent me, this content last night, the content was put together by, 4 podcasters for kind of this idea of being able to like write scripts, and you don't have to record interviews anymore. You just have the AI do it. And I'm like, there's so much that humans are going to be able to offer in a podcast that I don't think AI is going to be able to do. And, it's a fascinating conversation. I mean, it just brings up so many things that we have to solve as a society. AI is not going away, people. It's literally going to, invade so many things that we do. But if we do it intelligently, I mean, we can have AI work for us rather than, all the, the scary side of what the potential for AI could do. And I'm not alone in saying that. I mean, the leaders of Google and Bing and OpenAI have recently gotten together to pen an article and then sign it together against the potential negative, harmful ways in which AI can be utilized. And they are united against, or, they're united in trying to solve the problems that AI presents. So I do think it's great when it comes to like limited use. For example, we use Descripts to edit these, podcast episodes, and they have an overdub feature where if I want to replace a couple of words, I mean, I did train my voice on it. I went through Descripts exercise to train your voice. So I can use the overdub feature. I don't have to re-record sections if I completely screwed up my words, which happens. And so in limited use, I think AI is great, especially for podcasting and many different industries. But when it comes to really taking over stuff that is better suited for humans. Anything related to like human emotion, human connection. I really don't want AI invading those places. But it's a fascinating conversation nonetheless. So with that, let's get into our interview today. Today, my guest is Elizabeth Garr. She is the host of the podcast, What It's Like to... A podcast that lets you vicariously experience intriguing things that you may never get a chance to do. You can learn what it's like to summit Mount Everest, attend the Academy Awards, and be a professional baseball player. What It's Like To has a listen score of 32 and is ranked in the top 5%. So well done, Elizabeth, and welcome to Beyond the Microphone.
Thanks, Adam. So happy to be here. And that's a fascinating topic you were starting with, because I also thought, well, podcasting and this type of thing is, isn't going to be taken over by AI, because this is human interaction. This is conversation. This is emotion and thought. And then you bring up something like that, and I thought, oh my gosh, even we're going to get replaced.
I guess all of us will at some point get replaced. I mean,
Let's hope not.
What are we all going to be at a beach one day and just having a Mai Tai in our hand and just,
I guess that's the positive outlook on it.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's fascinating because there's a lot that AI is like really, really great for, and sophisticated. And I mean, I play guitar here and there, but I'm a terrible songwriter. And I went into ChatGPT. I said, "Hey, write me a song. Kind of here's the chord structure and the progression and kind of the theme for some lyrics." And it generated a whole song. And I could do something like, all right, well, I don't want the chorus to be in B. Let's change it to E. So it's like got this iterative back and forth. So it's wild to think that it's really only been here for a couple years, ChatGPT.
Yeah. And I also heard, like, for travel plans, some people are using it to say, I'd like a beach, but in a not that populated area, and I'd like to spend this much a day and eat at these types of restaurants, and it'll give you a whole itinerary. So things like that I had never even thought about. So,
and it can, when it comes to content creation, it's fascinating. Like, I think that's a great use for it. Like, I mean, this could be I guess a good argument either way, but like blog content generation. So would you be interested in reading an article that was written by AI? I mean, I've kind of gone through an exercise where I know for myself, like, if it's like offering insightful information, why not? It doesn't matter at that point if it's a human written article or an AI one. I mean, if the article is about like, some sort of human experience thing, then maybe not. But something was fascinating. About a month ago, I actually I went into ChatGPT and I said, "Hey, write me an article I can use on my website about the ways in which AI can be utilized in the podcasting industry." And I want it to be about 1,500 words. And it generated a really thoughtful piece. And so I published that on my blog. And I said, like, this is written by AI. I didn't write a word of this. More for just kind of striking a dialogue. And I actually went onto Facebook, onto some community Facebook podcasting group. And I kind of put that question out there. I'm like, hey, this article was written by AI. Check it out. Like, what do you guys think? And it started a really, really fascinating conversation. There's people that like were up in arms about it. Like, no way, I don't like AI. And other people were like, yeah, it's cool. Like, it really saves me a lot of time. Obviously, I think somewhere in the middle is obviously probably going to be, where people are going to feel comfortable with AI. Because, we don't want it replacing jobs.
Yeah.
We don't want students cheating on their homework assignments, but why discount it altogether? So the interesting thing is that this Facebook group actually took down my article. They thought it was self-promotional, but
I think what's interesting is you sparked human connection by putting that up there. You sparked people thinking and talking and dialogue, which is kind of an interesting, side benefit to the whole thing.
Yeah, and we have to have these conversations about it. But anyway, let's get into you here today, and I definitely want to find out what your journey's been like. So, here on Beyond the Microphone, I think one of the things that is most fascinating to me are the stories behind how podcasters get into this space. I myself, kind of have a story that put me into this podcasting world. I never thought I would be doing what I'm doing today. And so I have a story, and so many people get into it with like passion and purpose, and there is often a story to tell. So
Yep.
tell us about your background and ultimately, what led into you getting into the podcasting space.
My stories. Yeah, everyone does have interesting stories. My professional background is in journalism. I used to be a print journalist and then a TV journalist. I worked in local news and in production for PBS and E! Entertainment and a bunch of, networks and that sort of thing. And so then I worked in documentary film. And so I kind of have a bunch of like production, writing, all that in my background. And then I took a lot of time off and I was a stay-at-home mom. Mm-hmm. And a couple years ago, I thought, I really want to get back into something professional. But I live in San Francisco Bay Area. Mm-hmm. I've lived in LA and New York. And I thought, I can't really get back into TV or film work as much here. And so what can I do that uses a lot of my interests and passions from the past? What do I really like doing? And I thought, well, I love interviewing people. I love researching. I love editing. Mm-hmm. I do love visual too, which of course some podcasting now is doing more with YouTube and all of that. But at the time when I was thinking of this, I hadn't thought of that stuff. And so I thought, well, maybe I can use all that in podcasting. And so I came in pretty naive, quite frankly, because I thought, well, I know how to do quite a bit of this. I need to learn some. So I took a podcasting course, an extension course through Stanford. Mm-hmm. It was the pandemic, so it was an online thing.
Yeah.
And I learned some more, but I came in a little bit blind. Like I knew what I knew, and then I realized as I got into it, there's so much that I don't know. And I'm still in that zone. Like I feel like every week there's more of, and I don't know this and I don't know that. And in a way, I think that naivete was kind of a blessing, because maybe anytime you start something new, it's good to, if you knew everything, maybe you'd never start something new, because right. It's too much. Could be a little overwhelming. Everything you don't know could stop right. you from starting.
Well, a lot of people get, kind of like this chasing perfection or imposter syndrome type of thing that comes to play into it, where it's like, until I have this concept nailed down perfectly and I feel completely comfortable doing interviews and stuff like that, I'm just not going to do it. Right. And so, like even for myself, I mean, I kind of, I listen to a lot of podcasts. So when I knew that I wanted to start one, I went to one that How I Built This with Guy Raz. I love that podcast. I'm like, well, he's got kind of a cool format, at least. I mean, I don't do really any narration, and, this Beyond the Microphone maybe doesn't align with that format as much as my former podcast, The Change, where, you kind of lead in with a hook, some sort of a quote from the guest, and, just how the episodes are utilizing background music and stuff like that. But, I think just kind of launching into it with some semblance of an idea and some semblance for how to get it done, like that's all you need, really. Like, don't overthink it. Like, if you want to get into this work, it's, the entry into becoming a podcast host is a lot easier than I think a lot of people kind of think, it can be or it should be.
But then I think the continuity of it is the hard part, because you have to think about how you're going to be able to keep your cadence up. Because like what I made my episode in my little class, my podcast class, I remember some of my co-students, my fellow students saying, "Oh, it's very NPR-ish," because of course those are the ones that I listen to too. And I had put so much production into it. I spent so much time on this like 14-minute piece with music and all sorts of splicing in and, narration and interviews and all this. And I thought, there's no way I can personally produce a piece like this on a weekly or twice monthly basis. It's just little old me. I don't have a team of producers around me.
Exactly.
So you kind of have to think of how many people you have working on this thing and what is actually possible to put out. And so I thought I have to scale this back, or just do a different thing. Like I do have an interview show, because that's much more possible. I can't do all of this multi-leveled production kind of stuff. And so And so at times, like right now, I'm releasing every other week because I have a lot of other stuff going on in my life. And,
Yeah.
at times I was doing it every week, and you just kind of have to figure out how much you can handle. And like a big part for me that is still remains a challenge is just the marketing and promotion of the thing.
Yeah.
Because I don't have any business background. I'm like a creative person. And so that whole part just is like this beast to me out there of like, how do I tackle this? And so trying to always get on top of that part of it and figure stuff out and try new things out always just feels like I just want to kind of do the product. So that, I just feel like there's so many elements you could be doing at all times, and you have to figure out, you have to prioritize what you want to spend time on.
Hey there, fellow podcasters. This is Tori Barker of the Creative Visionaries podcast, and I'm excited to introduce you to Podtask, the all-in-one platform designed to streamline your workflow and take your show to the next level. If you're tired of feeling overwhelmed by the tasks required to manage your podcast, then check out Podtask, where you can easily streamline your podcasting process and simplify your workflow. Say goodbye to the stress of managing multiple tasks and deadlines, and hello to a more efficient and productive podcasting experience. And it doesn't just stop there. Podtask also offers AI-based marketing tools that give your podcast a competitive edge. As a fellow podcaster, I know from experience how important it is to have a reliable and efficient tool like Podtask to keep you on track. It helps save me so much time in post-production, which allows me to focus on what really matters, creating great content for my listeners. So if you're ready to take your podcast to the next level, head over to podtask.com and sign up for a free forever plan and get started today.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, that I've actually spoken about that quite a few times on this podcast, the business of being a podcaster. And,
Yes.
I'll share with you the story that I shared before, which is, so I just mentioned I used to have a podcast called The Change.
Uh-huh.
I was publishing bi-weekly. Okay, so that's a manageable workload. It's just twice a month. But one of the things I knew I wanted to set out to achieve was building like enough of a backlog of episodes where if I needed to take 4 weeks off, I could do so, and I'm not missing my cadence on my release schedule. But a lot of people that because it was a podcast about mental health in the workplace specifically, and kind of this work-life balance, burnout, anxiety, that sort of thing that we experience in our professional lives. And I interviewed quite a few different authors, and so I'd want to read their books, right? And so that's pretty time-consuming. And we were kind of going after a high production value when it comes to the use of background music, pauses, mid-roll promos, and so on and so forth. And also I did have a sound engineer, but a lot of our editing style was really by hand. I mean, an example of which is, one of our steps with one of the podcasts I produce was, we give them like kind of like a rough cut track, and they'll go through and listen to the whole episode and come back with any edits that they recommend.
Oh, yeah.
So anyway, it was very time consuming. And of course, what that led into is I got very burned out by it. I mean, if it was the only thing I was doing, it would have been totally doable. But I run a IT consulting company with like 20 employees, and I've got 2 other businesses that I run. So it just didn't work out. I wanted to get back into podcasting again. So with Beyond the Microphone, there was a lot of intentionality with how I set things up, specifically so it's doable without really... doable in a way where I knew I was putting the structure in place to avoid burnout and have fun with it, because that's ultimately what I hope to achieve with this. And so, yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because, yeah, for people that are just starting out, like maybe the one of the things I would recommend, for 2 things actually, is think about what you're putting together, the format, the style, the release schedule, and that, and is it all going to be doable for you in your time?
Yeah.
I mean, are there things... There's a lot of software tools now, and we're sponsored by Podtask, so I'll give a plug out to those guys. But, there are a lot of tools that can help you really manage and streamline things. But then the other thing, like I mentioned a moment ago, is 100% backlog your interviews, like record. So today's Wednesday, July 12th. This is when we're recording this. Yesterday, the first episode of Beyond the Microphone actually was published. I've already recorded 22 episodes. So like my schedule right now, I can produce into 2024, which is a highly recommended way of doing things, because
that's
like I said,
awesome.
If I needed to take 5-6 weeks off, like I'm not missing a beat at all.
Yeah.
I'll be able to stick to my schedule. But let's get back to what it's like to. So I'm fascinated now to hear about how this particular premise of a podcast was put together, and how you go about getting your guests and all of that stuff.
Yeah, I went around and around trying to think of what I should really focus on, because as you can probably tell by what I ended up with, I have a lot of interests. I'm not just someone who was like, oh, I definitely want to do it just on, I remember someone give this example of, you shouldn't do a podcast, you need to be really niche. Don't just do it on food, do it on mangoes. Right. This was in my podcast course. And I thought, oh my gosh, I would get so bored of mangoes. Like after about 5 episodes, what more could I say on mangoes? And then I'd have this really devoted mango audience. And if I suddenly decided now I want to do something on trampolines, how would my mango people want to follow me? And they'd say, well, they would like you, the host. And I just could not ever find something that was that niche.
Yeah.
So I really am I'm a behind the scenes person. I'm the one who always wants to, stay through the credits of the film and, read the author's bio at the back of the book. I always want to know how everything is made. It's kind of like the Guy Raz podcast too. Right. So it is kind of that concept. So that's how I got to it, is like, what is it really like to be that person, do that thing? And so that's how that came about. And I started out getting guests pretty much just friends and friends of friends. It really got to like people I went to college with, friends of my sister, that kind of thing. And then I started, and I did a little bit the same thing. I batched some episodes before I launched just to feel better about it. I mean, not as many as you have, but I just didn't want to feel that stress, because I was coming out on a weekly cadence, and I just didn't want to suddenly feel like, oh my gosh, I'm so behind, because that's a terrible feeling of, now I have no guests, what's going to happen? And that happened a little bit the first year. How am I going to get guests? It doesn't happen anymore. But that is a really panicky feeling. So I'd rather have more under my belt. And so then it started happening that if some people would listen to the show and actually write in and say, hey, I think I know someone who would be good, or I might be good. And then I also cold call people. There are times that I just have a master list of general topics that I think would be fascinating, and I'll look for someone who might fit that category. That comes from my journalism background of just, I don't mind cold calling people and getting no for an answer, or just not even having someone respond. It takes a lot of time though. I mean, I don't have all the time in the world to just write to every, I don't know, circus performer. That's nothing that I've tried, but whatever it is, and to have no one write back. So it's a little easier. Recently, in the last 3 months or so, I've gone on these kind of matchmaker sites in podcasting that they have of, you're a guest and you're a host, and how to find people.
Right.
And that has been pretty successful, although you have to be pretty picky, I think, because especially for me, I think like there's a lot of people who pitch me themselves or their clients. And I want specific types of people that are obviously that fit my niche. So I have to really sort through.
Let me ask you, because this is something that came up. This is a conversation I've had with other podcasters, is on that very topic. Like, let's say you like set up an episode, you book a guest, the guest comes on and they are flat. They're not a public speaker. They've never really done it before. And it's just a flat episode. What do you do there? Do you publish still? Because you had the guest come on? Do you, as the producer and publisher, do you say, no, that one's not going to make it to the final cut? Like, what do you do there? Have you run into that before?
I actually haven't, but it is a fear. And I have been, as a guest on podcasts, I have been pre-interviewed on a few, and this is what they're screening for. I've talked to a few hosts and they say this, sometimes I talk to potential guests and it is an obvious no, like there's no way these people are getting on my podcast. And I think, oh, maybe I should be doing these pre-interviews, because I don't. I mean,
Yeah,
I
me neither. I
email
don't.
them
Yeah.
and I feel like I just have enough going on that I research them and I email them and I sort of hope for the best. So I have not run into that. And I guess I'm sort of, at the beginning, you said everyone has stories to tell about how they got their podcast. And I come from the idea too, just everyone in the world has interesting stories to tell. And obviously some are more entertaining than others. But I think maybe this is also from my news background. I think you can kind of pull out some pretty good stories out of pretty much anyone.
Yeah, no,
So
I do agree with you. And, it's our challenge as the host to draw that out and to try to, just to remember even that the guest is probably in that moment as uncomfortable as the host might be. And you can, break the ice that way, if nothing else. Right. So I want to ask you. Go ahead, please.
Sorry. I was just going to say, I think sometimes what's harder is I've had a couple people who've clearly been on a lot of podcasts, and they sometimes have their own thing they want to say, and they're just going to say it. They're not even going to necessarily answer the question. They're just so used to being interviewed that they're just going to almost say their spiel. That's almost harder to interview than the person who is a new interviewee. Like you hear about the politician who's going to answer the question they want to answer, not the question they're being asked. And it's not quite that, but it's sometimes. I remember one person I interviewed and I asked a particular question and he started telling me about his background as a kid. And I particularly didn't want to start there because I didn't think that was the most interesting thing, but I think he was just so used to beginning interviews that way. So, anyway, I think that can even be more challenging as an experienced interviewee.
You're completely right about that. I had somebody come on recently and, I mean, for me personally, what I get excited about as a host, but also as a listener is when I can hear like a genuine, human being, like a genuine conversation, when their authenticity like is just apparent, and it's there and they're being their real selves. And, those are the ones that you really, as a host, you don't even have to, like, at that point, when you come across those types of people, it's just such a natural conversation that I don't even have to look at my, kind of like scripted questions that I've come up with. It's just a great conversation. And then I had someone come on recently and it's like out of the gates, they came on and clearly like they went into like podcast guest mode.
Yes.
And so anyway, I totally know what you're talking about.
You know how they say ABR, always be rolling? And I feel like at the end of the interviews is when I often get the most interesting stuff. It's like the person is kind of lets down a little and then starts to just, I don't know, relax and tell some more interesting stuff. And sometimes I move that stuff to the top of the interview or top of the episode because it's just so much more genuine than what they start saying.
Here's something that was interesting because, like, I used to be a wedding photographer, and my style is I always wanted genuine. I guess I was more of kind of this documentary format type of wedding photographer, and what I was trying to capture were real moments and real memories. And for probably the first few years, I just kind of did my thing, and I think I got great photos, but I wasn't necessarily focused on capturing that genuineness. And then I took this workshop from a photographer named, I think his name is Jesh Darax. And he had this beloved collective, I think is the name of it, like methodology. And I wonder how much this can apply to like doing interviews where it's more about kind of trust building and relationship, like breaking down the walls. And so he would teach us in this workshop these just various like different levels of games that we can play with our couples to get them to be themselves, break down those walls. And like level one was kind of like just like funny little games that the couples can play together. And then if they were doing well with that, you could take them to level 2, which now you're getting into maybe some like emotional type of stuff. Level 3, everybody's crying. The photographer, everybody will be crying. I did a couple level 3s with some clients and all of us were just like, woo, like So I wonder how much in podcasting you can kind of maybe find some tips or tricks to utilize like that really help an interview, like people to let down their guard and stuff like that. I'm sure there's clever ways and tips that people are using. But
Yeah,
what have been some
that's
of,
cool.
in the conversations that you have, like what are some of your favorite conversations that you remember? Some of the, best memories from your interviews that you've had?
Well, kind of on that note, what you're saying about the emotional realness. This is one of someone who wrote to me, and actually is one of the most popular episodes. Is a woman who talked about her alcoholism and her recovery, and that was something initially I thought I don't know if that really fits into my categories of. But anyway, I interviewed her, and she was incredible because she was so raw and she hadn't really told her story much before. She just decided, she had told it, I guess, locally to maybe a small group. But she was just in this mode of, you know what, I'm ready. This is important for me as a step in my recovery. I want to be very open about this, and I wonder if I can help anyone else. So she was not kind of a practiced like AAA person. I'm out here to. It was a very personal moment for her to speak publicly about this. And she was just so it was so touching to me how I don't know how revealing she decided to be. And I remember at one point I just said something like, I feel for that teenager, in you. And I just felt I'd never met her, but I suddenly felt so close to her after about 10 minutes of talking to her, because she was being so raw. And just felt like a kind of a special connection with somebody I had never met, because she was opening herself up. And I think that because of the response to the episode then got, I was like, clearly listeners felt that too. Because I don't think in general people would say, oh, let me listen to something about a recovering alcoholic, but she really did something there.
So what she did was make herself vulnerable, and it's a scary place. And, something I think that's worth mentioning is, what sells in photography and in podcasting? Like what are some themes that keep an audience engaged and wanting to come back for more? In my opinion, it's emotional connectedness. It's hearing vulnerable, authentic stories. Those episodes will always sell themselves, I think, because, and this speaks to what I believe why I think podcasting is such a awesome and unique communication medium. Is when you're a listener and you're in your car, you got your headphones on, you're jogging, whatever it may be. Like a lot of these storytelling podcasts, I love those. For me as a listener, those are my favorite, like The Moth. And I've heard so many Moth storytellers share these extremely vulnerable stories. And as a listener, I feel like I'm in like a room alone with them. And, I could feel the emotion of them recounting like an event that happened. Like I could feel that. And I think that's so cool with podcasting, right? That there's this format that, really in a day and age where so many of us are working remote and we don't, there's been somewhat of an erosion of like actual human contact. Like podcasting has become, for me at least, like it kind of supplements some of that human connection. Even though I'm not like directly face to face with somebody, like as a listener, I get brought in. I get brought into the story as if I'm right there in that room when that event is happening. And I think, that's so amazing about podcasting. Like, what's your...
Yeah, and I think part of that is because it's just audio. As much as I love video and have video background, when you're talking about like The Moth and these personal stories, when you're just hearing it, that level of personal connection somehow is heightened beyond just seeing it. Because when you're seeing it also, I think we're layering on a lot of extra things. Maybe we're putting on unsuspecting judgments, or there's just a lot more going on. But when it's just that audio, it's so intimate. And so when people are being vulnerable and giving these personal stories, it feels close, and I feel like the intimacy is heightened because of that. So I love how you said that, because I agree. I think there's something really special about the audio only podcast world.
Yeah. And my thought to that is, when it's audio only, it's much like reading a book, where there's so much that is happening in your imagination. Like, you're trying to, kind of like imagine the room they were in when something was taking place, and, imagining what they look like and people's reactions. And so I think you're right. I do think that those audio formats, lend more to the emotional receptiveness of the particular story or interview or whatever it may be. But I wanted to ask you, and you've already mentioned some of these, but if you can kind of elaborate more on what have been some of the highlights and challenges for you in your podcasting journey. I mean, it could be anything, technical, guest related, whatever. What are some of the highlights and challenges that you can share with us?
The highlights, what I guess first came to mind is I really like connecting with all these different people. Even just, I'm not trying to, whatever they say, butter your bread or something, but like just talking to you, I just feel like, wow, I'm talking to this really interesting person today that half an hour ago I didn't even know. And I feel like that every time I interview someone or I'm interviewed by somebody, it's just like, this is such a cool medium for me that I've gotten to meet and have interesting conversations with this wide variety of people every time, even if I'm feeling I'm getting ready for an interview and I'm feeling maybe a little overwhelmed. Do I know what I'm going to say to this person or something? And then I get into it and I'm like, this is the best. I just love this. And so I come out super energized every time. Like, what a blessing, that I get to just interact with these really interesting people.
Yeah, it really is a gift. And that was something that was, I don't know, I guess somewhat unexpected for me. Just, and you could probably say the same thing, but like almost after every single interview, I'm like, let's stay in touch. Let's talk more, and like,
totally.
Wanting to be like BFFs. And
new
stuff
best
like
friends.
That. So,
yeah,
exactly. So, and that's because I think, we're having a conversation that, sometimes things come up and they're, we're sharing with each other, and, the ideal. And I think what we're all trying to achieve at the end of the day is trying to help somebody in one way or another. And so we all have that mission behind us, whether it's helping somebody in mental health, helping somebody like enter into the podcasting space, helping to, somebody being able to relate to a dream they've had, like wanting to be a baseball player. When I read your description and you mentioned about, hey, you can see what it's like to be a baseball player. Like, I definitely clued into that. And I wanted to ask you, have you had a baseball player on the podcast, or what? I guess give me the story behind that statement you made in your premise.
I did. I had a guy, and how I got him is he's the son of a friend of my husband's, and he's a professional baseball player. When I booked him, he was in the majors, and then by the time we interviewed him, he had been demoted to the minors. So I think he's still in the minors. He had an injury, but he played many years in the majors.
What was the episode, or where can people find
so
it?
It's a two-parter. I think it was his name is Joe Biagini, and he was so good. And talk about being vulnerable. He is completely out there and vulnerable about all the struggles he has, the self-doubt he has had, which he thinks is the reason that has plagued. He has not had as much success as he could have, is because of his own self-doubt. I mean, he is really, I could not cut it down to one episode. So it's a two-parter. I believe it ran last summer. And I interviewed him from a hotel room in Buffalo or something. I think is where he was at the time. And he's really funny and self-deprecating. He was just a total delight. And again, one of these people that I was like, oh, can I just stay in touch? You're such a sweet guy. He was 30 or something. So that's how I got in touch with him. And I also realized I didn't answer part of your earlier question about some of the challenges. Do you want me to circle back to that?
Yes,
because
please.
I would say there have been a few technical challenges, but I'm lucky because my husband is kind of technical. I know a lot of podcasters I've talked to have said that's their number one thing is, but I am not technical, but I have somebody who helps me with that. So for me, the biggest part is, like I mentioned earlier, just the marketing and the frustration of being like, I'll put a lot into this and then think, I don't know the best way to get the word out about this, because I'll read all these articles about like best practices to get word out about your podcast. And there maybe be like 8 things. And it's like, I can't do all of those 8 things for each episode. Or they'll say, do social media. And I'm like, I wasn't even on social media before I started my podcast. So do I spend all this time building up a social media audience? And people are like, no, that's not worth it. You should do newsletters, and you should do Facebook. You should do promo swaps. You should do that, and I'm like, you should get yourself in your local newspapers. I'm like, right. It all sounds great, but there's only 24 hours in the day, and I'm not going to spend every minute of the day promoting my podcast. And so trying to decide which of these avenues to go down, and that feels overwhelming to me. And so I sometimes just feel like I put up the white flag and go, let me just make my episode. And, and I kind of give up. So I think
the confusion, because you see it, there's so much online, when you start looking into like all the content that's out there, they're going to tell you 500 different things, right?
Yeah.
I think that, there's some recipes that may work for one podcast, but they're not going to work for another or another type of podcaster. I mean, I'm a Gen Xer, and it's funny because I work in technology, but like I had to go to my older kids and be like, guys, help me out with TikTok. I don't even know what to do here. Like every time I go into TikTok, it thinks I'm some middle-aged perverted man, right? And trust me, I'm not searching for stuff. In fact, it like kind of turned me off of it. So I stopped using it. But now it's like, oh, everybody, as a podcaster, you got to be making sure you're doing as much as you can with short form video, and TikTok needs to be a part of it. So like the other day I posted my first TikTok video. I'm like, I don't even know who's going to find this. I mean, I guess some people have been commenting on it. So, but it's interesting.
That's
like,
good.
And I think the answer is really, what works for you as a person, what works for you as a host, and what fits into your podcast structure. But what would you say to us would be, in your experience for your podcast, can you point to like maybe one like best advice that you could give to our audience here in terms of growing and really, getting your podcast out there and doing it in a way where you can see that your audience is growing because of this thing that you're doing? Is there some like silver bullet that you can that works for you that you can advise our audience here today?
Boy, I wish. I don't think so. I think it's just been kind of slow and steady. I have not seen a silver bullet yet. I think it's just staying with it is my only non-silver, my tarnished bullet that is just not going away. My consistent bullet.
You actually said something pretty. This is actually pretty profound advice, and I'm gonna summarize it for you if I may.
Yeah.
It sounds like what you're recommending is patience, and I do highly agree with that, because it does take a long time. You're not going to drop a new podcast and all of a sudden you're going to be at 10,000 downloads per month. Like,
no.
It takes a long time, and you might get to a point where you start to get disappointed by the numbers that you're seeing and like question, like, do I keep going or not? But patience, as you just kind of described, I think is such a profound and valuable tool as a podcaster, because somebody, I think it was maybe Alex Sanfilippo or somebody that I interviewed here, said it takes about, I think it was Alex, it takes about 2 years. When you get to that 2-year mark with your podcast, that's when you actually start to see a lot of things start to kind of, all that momentum that you've been building over the 2 years really starts to, you can actually start to witness it a lot more at that point. What would you say to that?
Probably. I'm not there yet. I'm not at 2 years. But I've heard that as well. I've heard about 2 years, and sometimes even like the 5 or 6 years until you really start to see, being able to monetize, unless you're like a celebrity or have some major breakthrough. But so, I mean, patience is definitely the watchword. And so behind that, you need to have a topic you really like, choose your topic wisely. And then, like you had referenced earlier, get a schedule that works for you, get people around you that can, be able to sustain this, because otherwise you're just going to burn out pretty quickly and fast. And it's going to be hard to keep going when you're not seeing those numbers. It's not just a rising, diagonal line like you're hoping. I mean, what's interesting for me, because mine is kind of evergreen, all my episodes you could listen to anytime, they're not topical. Mm-hmm. So I'll get my reports, and sometimes episodes will have a lot of downloads that I released, 16 months ago or something. And I'll think like, oh, why did people like that one this week? But people just kind of go through the catalog and whatever interests them. Yeah. So I guess I'm kind of lucky that way, because I'm not like on politics or something that's
right. That's timely or whatever.
Timely.
All right. Well, as we come to a close here today, I always wrap with these same two questions. And so they're on the theme of discoveries. And so the first question is, in your podcasting journey, and I know you've probably spoken about a number of discoveries that you've already discussed them here, but are there any others that you want to highlight, discoveries you've made in your podcasting journey, just about podcasting, just the business of being a podcaster?
I think to be open to change in yourself and be open to the challenges, because like I said earlier, I felt like I knew some, and I knew there was some that I didn't know, but I also made a little mental note that part of the reason I wanted to start this was because I wanted a challenge. And so I often have to go back and remind myself that, because when challenges come up, that's actually part of the reason I did this. If I wanted to do something easy, I would have done something I already know how to do and just stayed in my lane. But this is part of the fun is the challenge, or the challenge is part of the fun. Yeah. It goes both ways. Yep. And so I think that you have to kind of remind yourself, come up with little mantras like that, because when the tough days come, or the little friction comes, that's all part of the journey.
Yeah, I love that. All right, so final question again on this theme of discovery. And you've mentioned a few already, but what... Hold on one second. Mm-hmm. Forgot to put my do not disturb on. Okay. What are some of the personal discoveries that you've made in your podcasting experience where you perhaps learned something about yourself that you didn't know before?
There have actually been quite a lot. That's a really insightful question. I'll try to make this short. I realized that I have a lot of confidence in some ways, but I realized deep down I have had a lot of self-doubt. And doing this podcast, I've had to confront that quite a bit, because the self-doubt will rise up during the challenging times, and I'll think, oh, I can't do this, or this is not going to happen, or this, and I have to overcome that and say, of course I can. I have this intelligence or this background, or I can figure this out. And so I've had to confront that little voice in my head many, many times and just sort of tamp it down. So I've learned about that, because I think often I have been staying in the safe lane. I haven't challenged myself in this way for a while. And so by taking myself, into this zone, this voice comes up more. So it's been interesting, but kind of exciting. I've grown a lot through it.
I love that. That's great. Well, that's a great way to close for today. Thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Thank you.
It's been a pleasure to meet you and to get to speak with you, and very excited to hear about what you're doing in your podcasting journey. So thank you so much.
Thanks so much. Great questions. It's been really fun to talk to you.
Thank you. Elizabeth Garr graduated with honors from Harvard College with a degree in history and literature, and promptly attended professional cooking school to become a food writer. She's worked on the television Food Network, PBS, and E!, and she earned a graduate degree in documentary film and video from Stanford University and currently hosts the What It's Like to podcast. Beyond the Microphone is sponsored by Podtask. Whether you're just starting out in podcasting or you've been at this a while and are looking to save time so you can focus on creating amazing content for your listeners, go check out Podtask, a podcast management and marketing platform designed by podcasters for podcasters. With Podtask's automated workflow and AI-based marketing tools, you'll save time and sanity and be better equipped to grow your podcasts. If you're enjoying Beyond the Microphone, please subscribe on Apple Podcasts or wherever you're listening, as well as to our YouTube channel. You can find all of the links for these in our episode show notes. Finally, are you stuck trying to take your podcast to the next level? Do you need help with marketing or post-production? At EIQ Media Group, we offer podcast coaching, production, editing, and marketing support. Head on over to www.eiqmediallc.com to learn more. Thank you all for listening. We'll see you next time on Beyond the Microphone.
Beyond the Microphone is produced and distributed by EIQ Media Group, LLC. Elevate your emotional IQ with podcasts and content focused on entrepreneurship, overcoming adversity, stories of emotional courage, women's health, aging, and more.